on criticality of vertical transportation for a building industry. And we have veteran Mr. Mathews, who is going to be leading the session. Mr. Mathews is a 30-year veteran of the elevator industry and has been responsible for many great initiatives for the elevator industry. TAC has been very active member on the Committee of Indian Elevator and Escalator Standards, and is also a convener on the National Building Code of India. TAC has played a very, very important role in establishing the first elevator escalator expo that was started in India. And he is now going to start one more expo called International Sourcing Expo for Elevators and Escalators. Mr. Mathews is going to enlighten us on a few topics that we've highlighted over here on the main screen, which you can see. And TAG, I would like to welcome you to our webinar that is hosted by Mumbai Suburban Developers Association. And I'll hand over the mic to you to please start and go ahead and start the session. Guys, we are going to record this, so for anybody else's future reference, it will be available. Thank you. TAG, please take over.
Thank you very much. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to switch off my video so that I can focus on what I'm going to say. Subsequently, when we finish my session, we can get back onto the video again. I think unless you want to say anything, probably it'll also make sense if you mute yourself. So then, you know, we can focus on what is being said. What I'm going to say today is not something that's new. I have been talking on many of these aspects over the last over 10 years. So if any of you have attended some of my presentations, you will find that there's a similarity. And the similarity is because whatever I've been talking about is still a problem even after 10 years. I apologize in case you feel that some of the things are repetition. We as human beings have always wanted to grow tall. It's been something that has been in existence from prehistoric times. There have been references to real tall structures, real tall buildings from prehistoric times. But when you go through research, one of the tallest buildings that comes out is a reference in the Bible, and they talk about the Tower of Babel, and it is seen as a reference in many other books also, many other religious books. So why is Tower of Babel an interesting topic when we talk about tall ambitions is interesting. So again, when you research it, there is a Professor Gordon who has done a research about what could probably have been done with the Tower of Babel. How tall could it have been? And he comes to the conclusion that it could probably have been 2 kilometers high on a minimum. In fact, he concludes that with whatever was available at that point of time, it could have been even much taller. In comparison to that, the Burj Khalifa is a midget. I mean, it's much smaller. The Kingdom Tower that is being considered is also much smaller. And the Mile High Tower, which is planned in Tokyo, completion 2045, probably in our, I don't know how many of us will be alive at that point of time. It's all in the future. It still has not reached what had been predicted in a prehistoric time. So the point that I have is, again, if you look at it from the Indian perspective, you have the Qutub Minar, which was the tallest structure in India till Usha Kiran was built. We had the Alai Minar, which was supposed to be next to it, which never got completed, which was planned to be 145 meters. And the idea, the thought is, so what's so great about being tall? We have always had the tall ambitions. We have always managed to construct. In fact, 145-meter tall buildings are not. We have tall buildings, but 145 is probably the norm. I mean, we have 120, 100 feet. Those seem to be the common buildings these days. So what's the difference between a structure and a building? We had a Qutub Minar, which was at 72 meters. We have Usha Kiran, similar height. And if you look at Wikipedia, it talks about a difference between Qutub Minar and Usha Kiran. And Usha Kiran is something that could handle continuous occupancy, while Qutub Minar was a structure. So now what supports this continuous occupancy? Again, Wikipedia reference, I know there are people who say that Wikipedia is not exactly a great reference, but when it makes sense, I think it makes sense. It says that till the 19th century, buildings above 6 floors was rare. And even then, the lower end of the segment, the low income segment used to be on the 6th floor, while the richer people used to be on the lower floor, which is a total difference to what happens today. I mean, the penthouse is the most expensive part of the building. And the whole thing changed, the entire thing changed in 1853 when Elisha Greaves Otis introduced the safety elevator. We had elevating devices earlier, but they were unsafe because in the eventuality the rope broke, it would be brought down. And Elisha Greaves Otis came up with a solution which ensured that we had the first safety elevator. And thus the lifeline to a living tall was put into place. And it's recorded that what changed the skyscapes of the country, the world, is Elisha Greaves's invention. So, concluding from whatever we have seen, stone and wood has been available from prehistoric times. Structure RCC was always available, but what was not available was the elevator. Yet the fact is that even today, even a bathroom in the design scheme sometimes finds higher priority. I sit through design meetings, and when I sit through design meetings, normally the buildings are 150, 200 or 250 plus meters. It could be buildings with populations of 10,000 plus. And I find it pretty hilarious that the focus shifts immediately to other things, including landscaping and not the elevators. So incidentally, I'm a civil engineer. So, I mean, I talk about structures. I know a little bit about structures. I know a little bit about architecture. So I say this with a lot of seriousness. It's not that I'm demeaning structures. It's not that I'm demeaning architecture, but this is the reality. Again, as a civil engineer, I talk about it. I think if your structure is wrong, if you've got your column sizes wrong, you've got your beams wrong, you've got your reinforcement, your grade of concrete wrong, more often than not, the only alternative that you have is to bring the building down. Yes, of course, we do have scenarios where people use scaffolding and bullies to prop up buildings. But in reality, the building is a little tall or a little big. This is not an alternative. You have to bring it down. There's very little opportunity to strengthen it and ensure that the building survives. What's the alternative if your elevator core is incorrect? That means if you require 6 elevators and you have only 4, or you require a larger hoistway and you have a smaller hoistway, or the pit is not adequate, or the overhead is not adequate. The alternative really is to bring the structure down. As consultants, we often are called in to find remedies for buildings which have been badly elevated. At the moment, we are struggling with 6 towers, all built about 10 years back. And the architects, the developer, everybody is now very upset because there's really no solution that we have. They almost sound as if it's our fault that we don't have a solution. I can understand the frustration levels because the tenants are all screaming. The tenants are all insisting on lower rental. The way I see it is there are 3 critical parts of a vertical transportation system: the design, the execution, and the maintenance. And you cannot have a compromise. You have to have a balance between all 3. To elaborate on this, if you have designed and you do not have enough elevators, irrespective of how well you execute it or how well you maintain it, you still have a problem. In fact, if you do not have enough elevators, the possibility is that you will not even be able to maintain them well because you will not be able to shut down, give the elevators for shutdown. We, about 3 years back, we went and audited a high-end hotel building in the city, in Mumbai. And I think mute yourself, request, yeah. So we went and audited the elevators and had to virtually ask people to shut down the elevator because there were a lot of unsafe events. I called up the MD of this multinational company, and we went into it and realized that the only time the mechanic would get a shutdown for maintenance was when the elevator had broken down, because they just didn't have enough elevators. We also do come across situations where the execution has been bad and you don't have a solution because the execution is bad. So we need to remember that these inseparable links, at any compromise at any stage, you compromise at the design, or you compromise at the execution, or you compromise at the maintenance, the consequences are very serious. Lots of formula. These are some of the formulae that go into establishing your design guidelines for elevators, to do your traffic analysis. When I put this thing across, people say, oh, we never knew that there was some things like this that were involved. The book that you would see on the right top two, the blue one is by Dr. Gina Bani. This is a 2nd edition book, and about 15 years before. I had picked up a first edition and I had spent 2 years with that book. And today I talk about traffic analysis. I think I know a little bit about traffic analysis because I've gone through that book. The next book is George Shakos. This is 4th edition of his book. There will unfortunately not be a 5th edition because he passed away. His first edition was in 1960s, I think 1963 or 62. The reason why I'm saying this is traffic analysis is not something that has emerged now. It has been in existence for 5 to 6 decades and not something that it has sort of emerged now. So Nariman Point, Cuff Parade and all are clear evidence of negligence that we didn't do traffic analysis. Cuff Parade and Nariman Point didn't happen 50 to 60 years back. The books 2 below are the National Building Code of India. Now, if you look at part 8, section 5A, which relates to lifts, it's got a chapter on elevator design, which is fairly comprehensive. And we are probably one of the few countries in the world that has a design basis for elevators as a national building code. The US doesn't have something, Europe doesn't have anything. The closest that somebody has is UK, where they have the SIPSI guide team. Now, we have experts who come in and provide traffic analysis reports and design basis. And the fact is that you have got good software, you put the software together and you get your responses. In fact, over the last 2 weeks, I have conducted 8 sessions on traffic analysis, 8 classes on traffic analysis online, and probably have covered about 300 people, out of which majority of them were people in the elevator industry. And the comments were that, oh, we never knew this. And I almost felt like kicking them because I know some of them have been recommending elevator designs for some of the very, very prestigious projects. So in reality, what happens in the design basis, more often than not, it's a thumb rule, it's a guess. You put in, the way I put it, okay, that building has 3 elevators, so let me put 3.5 elevators here. We also follow the 60-second fire lift rule. This is something that I've started seeing in recent times. So just to elaborate on it, the fireman's lift requires to be fast enough so that from the top floor it can reach the lowest floor in 60 seconds. Now this has a base. The reason why this rule has been brought in, and it's again been in existence for 30 to 40 years, is because invariably the service lift is your fire lift because it's big. And we have a tendency of reducing the speed of the service lift. So to ensure that it doesn't get too slow, that is the reason why this has been brought in. This is not the basis for your elevator design. And this has also been clarified in National Building Code of India. Budget, we do come across situations where seen that, okay, you need 6 elevators, you need it at 4 meters per second. The purchase team gets into the picture and says, no, it's too expensive, we can't afford it, so let's bring it down. Yes? Yes? A question? Okay. Now, the situation that I have is, if a person is from a low-end building or you don't have a budget and you don't need to go from here to Dubai to work, as many of our labor do, you're not going to send them by boat. You'll send them by a plane, which will be the same, will have the same safety characteristics as any other plane. Whether it is Anil Ambani's plane or it is Indian Express, the Air India plane, the safety factors are still going to be the same. Of course, another design driver is FSI. And we do have some very funny buildings that come up on account of this. And of course, management decision. We come across projects where the thing is said, oh, it's a management decision. We need to recognize whether it's a management decision or FSI, that once the building is elevated wrong or incorrect or inadequately, there's really nothing that can be done. So these 6 towers that we are talking of, about 45 to 60 floors and very high-end buildings. And today you are losing tenants because the elevators are inadequate. And from a design perspective, there is often a situation where you pick up the planning brochure of an elevator company and do that. Yes, planning brochure do give you some information, but that's not enough. And now software, everything is software today, but we need to recognize clearly that garbage in is garbage out. This is not enough. There's a lot more that needs to go in.
Sorry to interrupt, Matthew, but are you going to give an example of a design for any?
In fact, the next slide, I'm just showing you what happens on a bad building. I'm not going to give you the name of this building. So this is a building that we have. Yes.
No, but in a particular with a particular how passengers capacity is required? Are you going to show it?
No, I will not be covering that today. But let me just sort of put it across. So if you have two buildings, unless it's very purely a residential building, two buildings are rarely identical. In fact, traffic analysis class once again.
I wanted to make the PowerPoint.
I'll probably conduct this traffic analysis class once again, and then you'll sort of understand why I say that just because you have two identical buildings with the same population, why you would not be able to say that, okay, this elevator requirement here and there is the same. Just to give you one example, if your building is next to a metro, you probably would require more elevators than a building which is in a very, very crowded location. Now, if you get into the formula, get into the traffic analysis, you'll understand what it is. So, just to give you an example of a building that we tried to go in and resolve. So your peak queue length builds up to over 300 per bank. The lobby that the client had was inadequate, as a result of which people had to actually wait in the driveway. Your average waiting time was over 350 seconds, which is close to 6 minutes. Remember, it's average. So there will be some people who would have got it at 0 seconds, and there will be some people who would probably be waiting for 10 to 12 minutes to get their elevator. And this is an actual fact, and the building is in existence, and we see it happening. We've actually done a physical time estimate to see whether this actually corresponds, make calculations correspond to that. Now, if you look at it in terms of loss of hours, it's over 200,000 hours, which is significantly higher than the cost of the elevators of having or incorporating the number of elevators that would have been required. Of course, the elevators were not compliant. They didn't have service lifts. They didn't have stretcher lifts. And incidentally, I was on an aircraft when I saw that it has been rated as a smart building. It's a different matter that people have to wait. So an outcome of this, just to sort of, again, give you a reality check. These are newspaper cuttings of accidents that were reported in 2019, fatal accidents. Now, I'm calling this as saying reported because of the simple fact we know that there are lots of accidents around the country that are pushed under the carpet. For instance, I've got accidents which have been reported from Karnataka, and people in the elevator industry, colleagues from the elevator industry tell me that the figure that I have from Karnataka or from Andhra or from Telangana are way less than what really has happened. Now, 28 reported fatalities is something that is just not acceptable, because if you remember what I had shown in that Elisha Greaves Otis, his declaration is all safe. And elevators by per se are the safest means of transport that you can have. There is no reason, there's nothing that could have happened as a result of why somebody should have died. So the rest of the session, we will just explore as to what exactly transpires. So this was in 2019 and 2020. Before we had the shutdown, we had at least 8 fatalities, which means if you were to sort of extrapolate it, if we didn't have the shutdown, we would have probably crossed the 28 of 2019. Now, I have been talking about the possibility that these fatalities will start happening for about 10 to 15 years. And it is pretty depressing, pretty frustrating that what I had predicted is actually started coming true. And what I'm presenting to you right now is something that I've talked to the managing directors of OEMs. I've had a session last Saturday with which I addressed the elevator industry. I'm doing a similar session again for the elevator industry tomorrow. So if you were to explore why this happened, I mean, like, for instance, one of the things that we commonly hear is that the elevator door opened and the person stepped in, there was no elevator there. And this keeps happening often. But what we need to recognize is that the elevator landing door has no mechanism for it to open on its own. We also need to recognize that if an elevator landing door is open, there is no reason why the elevator can operate, because there is an electromechanical lock, or rather there's supposed to be an functional electromechanical lock on this landing door. We have seen this happening often, and we have sort of started accepting it, saying that, okay, the door opened and there was no elevator there. If you go by standards, if you go by norms, if you go by best practices, every elevator door, landing door is supposed to have an electromechanical lock. And what is even sad is after an accident happens and somebody is killed, we use what is reported in the newspaper is a freak accident. And there's nothing freak about an elevator accident. There is nothing in an elevator which is freak. If an incident happens, it is happening just because of pure negligence. There is no way it can be classified as freak, but unfortunately, we have got comfortable with identifying it as freak. So what are the leads into fatalities? I keep saying that the first thing is that we have started lowering the product quality standards. When I say we, I mean the elevator industry, I mean the buyers, I mean the users. Our motto when it comes to elevators has started becoming cheap, cheaper, cheapest. I know people do take offense when I say this, but this is again something that I have been repeating for long. And just to sort of to elaborate on this, why would a door lock not be functioning? Why would an electromechanical norm, which is a requirement by standard, which is a requirement by safety, not be functioning? And we have a situation where the landing door opens and there's no elevator there and somebody falls through. And I come back to the original balance thing I said, design, execution, maintenance. We have started going through the same situation across the board. When it comes to design, we look for the cheapest alternative. When it comes to execution, we look for the cheapest alternative. And when it comes to maintenance, again, we look at the cheapest alternative. Non-compliance with standards and codes. IS 14665, which is the parent document for standards and codes in for elevators and elevators in India, is one of the most stringent documents that you will find anywhere in the world. Of course, it might not be very elaborative because in India, things do take time to change. And the question that I ask everybody is, these are our standards and codes, and what in these standards and codes required to be changed to have avoided these accidents? And invariably, the answer is there was nothing. If only people had just followed the standards and the codes, we wouldn't have had these accidents. This is a cartoon thing which I get across, and I think it sort of says the thing. You will always find somebody who can find it cheaper. Now, in this situation, the picture is this. He wants a Pegasus to be drawn as a tattoo on his back, but look at what he ends up getting. There will always be somebody who can do it cheaper. And as we go through it, I will elaborate the consequences of this approach. This is on the top, right on the top, is an elevator sheave. If you can see the casting is worn out and you can see holes in it. This elevator is barely 3 months old. And we were called in to investigate to find out what was wrong. And this was the state of the casting. I don't think I need to elaborate more on the status of this machine. We investigated a little bit more to find out what had transpired, and then we subsequently realized to save on costs, the supplier, the OEM supplier, bought the machine from a reputed company and decided to save on costs and have a cheaper bed frame. And the net result was this. Fortunately, nobody died. It was a smaller thing, so nobody died, nobody got hurt in this elevator, but this is what transpired. Okay, let's look at it from a consultancy perspective. Karan did give a little bit of information about my background. I thought, let me just sort of elaborate on it. It's 3 years, 3 decades, and it's a hands-on experience, and it's not been on sales and marketing. I have been a projects person, I've been a maintenance person, I've been a modernization person. Yes, I've done some sales and marketing, but I've been a field person more. I'm a certified elevator inspector, and I can inspect and certify elevators in the US and Canada. I'm a certified elevator consultant. I'm a chartered engineer. I'm a member of the Standards and Codes Commission. And on an average basis, I publish about 6 to 8 papers domestically and internationally. I'm often called by international associations, international people to go and talk. And that's my background. And still people come and turn to me and ask me, why are you so expensive as a consultant? And in aspect, when you see who they're comparing it to, it's somebody who probably has experience as much as me, or maybe even more than me, and probably has been a good and sales and marketing person. His experience or his intention or his understanding, just because he calls himself a consultant, doesn't make him a consultant. So what is the consequences of that cheaper, cheapest? I do not know whether you recognize this picture. This is an incident that took place on 31st night. And this jugaad, I call it a jugaad because there is nothing in this lift or this elevator which meets the standards and codes. This jugaad killed 6 people from a crorepati family, and this happened in Indore. There is nothing that this gentleman could not have afforded. There's nothing that could have prevented this man from buying an elevator which was absolutely safe. Yet, our thought process of going cheap, cheaper, cheapest ended up costing this man his life, and along with it, 5 members of his family. I believe 2 days into the new year, 1 or 2 more people died from that family. Now, we need to very clearly recognize that an elevator is not a jugaad device. There are aspects of it that cannot be compromised upon. And if somebody is giving it cheaper and cheapest, the question should not be that you ask the person who is more expensive as to why it is more expensive. What you probably should be asking, from a question of prudence, from a question of remaining safe, is how are you managing to make it cheaper than everybody else? We have found situations where the lowest price person is probably about 50% cheaper than the person who is L2. And that is a matter of concern, and we need to really recognize this. We have an issue in terms of lower statutory oversight. To take this city, for instance, Maharashtra, we haven't had a full-time chief inspector in over a year. It's a political issue. I believe it's sort of correlated to the money transaction that happens. And the second point sort of puts it across. It's an open secret that licenses are bought. We have seen instances when, for whatever may be the reason, maybe it might be an OC or whatever it is, we pay money and get licenses. I have seen numerous buildings where the elevators are not even inspected. We have paid, we have ensured money reaches, and we get licenses handed. The same thing applies to the license. Because in Maharashtra, for instance, you require a lift contractor's license, and even that can be bought. So I'm just sort of putting it across. The lower statutory, just because you have an inspection doesn't necessarily mean that your elevator is going to be safe, because the person is inspecting it in a little bit of time in the entire life of that elevator. But even that is something that we are now compromising on. Over the years, the competence and experience of the elevator and escalator personnel has started reducing. When I joined the industry, I had joined Otis. At that point of time, Otis was the big dadas of the elevator industry. I remember I was in the office for 1 week, and then I was sent on the field. This is after being an engineer, after being an MBA. They sent me on the field and said that we will call you back when we think you are ready. And I was at site installing and commissioning elevators. Subsequent to that, I was on an elevator maintenance route where I was maintaining elevators. Like, for instance, I started my experience in Delhi, and even today, if you tell me about Ashoka Hotel or you talk to me about Meridian Hotel, I can tell you the back road, and I can tell you where the elevators and what they are and how they are. This is an issue which I have been addressing with the elevator industry, that competency. Again, in terms of the attempt to save on costs, what is happening is elevator companies, the elevator industry is generally compromising on training, the field training, because field training takes time. They're compromising on it to ensure that the person brings in more money, brings in more return. And unfortunately, technology has not kept pace such that we can do away with the competency that is required. And to make it worse, the market has been peaking. Real estate development has really gone, and the market has been booming. We are one of the second largest elevator markets in the world today. Then the final thing is inadequate user awareness. Inadequate user awareness from a perspective of the person who is buying, or inadequate perspective from the perspective of the people who are using elevators and escalators. Incidentally, I also run a trust called the Elevator and Escalator Safety Trust. The intention is to teach children how to use elevators and escalators safely. We have a full-fledged trust, and it has been in existence from 2008. We have covered about 400,000 children around the country today. We have this program in Gujarati, Marathi, Hindi, Telugu, Tamil, everything. Yet, we struggle to move forward because there is very little support, except for a few companies like Johnson Lives, Otis, ThyssenKrupp, and Schindler. There are very few companies who support it. In fact, we even do have problems with developers who will not give us access to a mall or will not give us access to their school, saying that, no, we do not need our children to be taught on elevators and escalators. So how do we achieve the cheapest? Just going back to the same point, the same things that created the issue related to fatalities is what we have as our target, or the process to achieve the cheapest elevator. you lower the product safety and quality standards, you don't comply with standards and codes, you don't have your statutory oversight, you pay the inspector and ensure that he doesn't need to come to site, lower competence experience. Overall, you do all this and we do achieve the cheapest elevator. I've been discussing it. It's not just with developers like you that I've been talking about. I've also been talking the same thing to the industry. And gradually, 10 years back, people thought that I was exaggerating. Today, many of them are realizing that we have a problem. But the question they turn around and ask me is, if the market requirement is the cheapest and our solution is not cheap, how do you expect us to survive? I turn around and ask them, what happens to your ethics and principles? Are you willing to compromise on anything just for the purpose of getting business? I'll just go on and onto this particular thing. We need to recognize that as a result of this, fatalities comes in along with it. The same reasons, the same way of achieving the cheapest are the same reasons how we manage to get the cheapest elevator. Just some other issues. These are some of the things that happen at a construction site. I don't think I need to get into too much of detail. This is like, for instance, this is water in the pit. This is water dripping on a machine. These are supposed to be sophisticated equipment. And this is how we do tend to treat it. And I keep saying that, we buy brand new elevators, we pay big money or maybe we pay cheap money. But at the end of the day, when the final user moves into it, the final owner moves into the building, these equipment are invariably second-hand. A small diversion. One of the things that has been posed to us over the last couple of days is what happened. Social distancing and elevator traffic analysis. Are the things going to change? A quick thing on traffic analysis. So what you see in yellow is 100% population, which are viewed to the traffic analysis. And suppose you had adequate handling capacity and adequate interval as per the National Building Code. Through and through that building situation, you are okay. Now, if you have to reduce that handling capacity or the number of people in the elevator, let's say a 20-passenger elevator, I understand that the norm that is being asked for by probably the cooperative offices is that the 20-passenger elevator, you should have only 4 people. So I would estimate that if it's a 10-passenger elevator, you could probably have only 2 people. Now, if you have designed the building from the first instant, the number of elevators is giving you a handling capacity which is lower. You already have a problem. And in that instant, if you have to lower the capacity per elevator, you have a huge problem. So my recommendation to developers who ask me this question is, if your building is adequately elevated during regular times, during this COVID situation where you need to reduce the number of people who can travel in the elevator to ensure social distancing, you are still comfortable. There are other things also that are being required. Okay, if you need to reduce the capacity in the elevator, what do you do? How do you ensure that more people do not travel in it? If it's a conventional elevator, the best way to do it would be your load weighing device. However, the load weighing device is a complicated, testing it is a complicated process which could take about 2 to 3 hours per elevator, and similarly to reset it back when things come in. So I tell people that the best alternative is to look for simple and easy implementable solutions. Just to sort of put it in perspective, there is a big fear that people will get infected from touching the elevator button. Yes, elevator button is a possible infection point. However, I find it a little hilarious because you worry about that button and then you walk straight into a supermarket where everything and anything is significantly more risky. I mean, like, for instance, you have the shopping cart, you have things that you pick up, and what do you do at all those instances? You keep sanitizing your hand. Now, this elevator button that you push is for a fraction of a second, and all you really need to do is immediately after you push that button, take your sanitizer out and sanitize your finger. And even if you feel that finger is a problem, use your elbow, trigger the call, after that, sanitize it. We have, the elevator industry has been coming out with very innovative solutions. And like, for instance, one of the things is the QR code. An average QR code implementation is about 30 to 40 seconds. If you want to use a QR code 30 to 40 seconds and you have a commercial building which, let's say, has 3,000 people, you can do the maths to realize how much time you would require for those 3,000 people to access the building. And you will probably resolve the problem in terms of the touching the button, but your lobby is gone because people will have to start crowding, and before long, the social distancing required in the lobby will become inadequate. So just to sort of a small diversion, we need to recognize that the simple and easily implementable solutions are the best alternative. There was a client of ours who is based out of Bangalore. Their building has become operational to about 50% occupancy. And we went through various options. And finally, they realized the best alternative was just to keep a bottle of sanitizer next to the buttons. And their problem was resolved. They were planning to implement some very expensive and complex solutions. And finally, we decided that the sanitizer bottle next to it was more than enough. Okay, so let's address I call it the elephant in the room because nobody really wants to talk about it. This is a picture, this is a statistics from 2017-18. We still import a lot of elevator, escalator, and components. If I'm not mistaken, this amounts to about 3,000 crores. 2017-18 was probably about 3,000 crores. And the question that comes up is, which is the country that benefits the most? There's no doubt about the fact that the country that benefits the most is China. And when I ask why, they say that, oh, China has got volume advantage. But let's not fool ourselves, because we need to recognize that it's not just the big companies who have got manufacturing setups in China. A significant part of the reason why we do business from China is because we have cheap products. I know of companies who will say that you tell us what you want, how you want, and they are willing to supply equipment. And it's not just because of the volume. It is not just because of anything else that they do it. We keep going back to China just because of the fact that they manage to give us cheap products. I have seen Chinese products. I'm not saying everything is bad. In fact, the laptop that I'm using right now is an Apple, which is made in China. I have an iPhone, which is made in China. I'm not saying everything is bad from China, but when you look at the elevator industry, a significant reason why we keep going back to China is because it is cheaper. How does it impact the user and our industry? It has a straight impact that our equipment is becoming less and less safer. It is becoming, the quality is going lower. Some of the fatalities and things like that happen are consequences of the cheapest approach. And it also impacts us. It impacts us as a country. When you look at the Make in India option that our Prime Minister had announced, not the Make in India objective or the Make in India target, this cheaper concept that we are looking at has a direct impact on not just the elevator industry. There's an impact across the board. Again, addressing the elephant in the room, just some press cuttings. We know what has been happening. We know what has transpired. I know of equipment that is coming from China. That sheave that I showed you with that defaulted in number 3 months is from China. I know of elevator ropes which have failed in less than 3 months. I have actually had to ask a supplier to replace over 100 elevators. He had to replace all the ropes in less than 3 months. 3 months to a year. I think on an average it was less than 6 months. And at the end of the day, it was related to quality. The question that I ask is, do we still want to continue buying cheap equipment from China? I do not have an answer to that because it's not in my hands. I know as a consultant, I do tell clients that this is a problem that needs to be addressed. Yet, if the objective is what I keep saying, cheapest, we probably will still keep going back to China. But the consequences are severe. And as we talk, it is getting worse and worse. Let me just give you a couple of other perspectives to this. In addition to the fatalities, the life of elevators is going down as we talk. Earlier, 25 to 30 years used to be the minimum life of the elevator, and you could push it up another 5 to 10 years by doing some modernization or some upgrading. Today, at the end of 12 years, 13 years, 14 years, we have seen 12-year-old, 15-year-old elevators where the supplier, the OEM goes back to the client and says, okay, now it's time to replace the elevators. The only reason why it has to be replaced is because it is cheap. I come back to the single point that it is no way you can make it cheaper without consequences. Maintenance also starts becoming a problem, and all these issues come in. Another problem that also comes up is because of the cheap and easy access of equipment from China. Today, you find elevator companies mushrooming up everywhere. I have a joke which I say that you think of a name, and most likely you'll find an elevator company by that name somewhere in this country. And many of them have very little industry knowledge, and they still are providing. They are supplying elevators to you. They are maintaining elevators, and the consequences are what we see. These are again some of the press cuttings. There's an active trend around the world for companies to shift out of China. The question I ask, and this I specifically ask elevator and escalator industry, is how many of these companies, how many of our elevator and escalator companies are looking at shifting back to India? This is particularly focused on the multinationals who operate in India today. Like Karan had mentioned, we have launched an elevator and escalator exhibition. I was involved in the first one. And one of the primary reasons why I have launched this along with my colleague Priyanka, who is on this call, is looking at making India the sourcing hub for the global elevator and escalator market. We are the second largest market in the world. Yet, when it comes into exports, we are probably not even in the first 20, which is a sad reflection of where we are. So most exhibitions survive. They make a lot of money on a substantial Chinese pavilion. From the first time since when we launched our show, we were very clear. It will not, IC will not have a Chinese pavilion. Yes, it will cost us money, but we are very firm. We are very clear in our thought process that for our industry to benefit, for our country to benefit, there are some lines that have to be drawn. A word of caution to some sort of coming to a conclusion. We need to recognize that beyond aesthetics, there is nothing cheap about elevators and escalators. Cheap cannot be achieved without compromise in quality and safety. Comparing between two elevator companies, the only reason why you can have a price difference which could be your overheads, whether it is a small company who buys it or a large company that buys it, the cost of steel cannot be that different where you have a 50% or a 75% price difference. The only way you can achieve that cheap is in quality and safety compromises. Again, I put this thing up. So if somebody is bringing something to you very cheap, you probably need to be asking a question, how are you managing to make it cheap? And when this thing is an elevator and it's a cheap elevator, the consequences could be dead. Now, when I talk about equipment, when I talk about elevators, I'm not just talking about it from a perspective of the material that is coming in. I'm also talking about it from a perspective of maintenance. If somebody is coming and willing to maintain those equipment at 25% of what the OEM has charged, you need to ask, how is he getting this 75% benefit? The elevator industry, none of us are in business for charity. We are all here to make money, and if they are making money at 25% of the rate of a thing, there is something that is being compromised. And finally, to conclude, yes, the situation is sad, is looking desperate, but I think it's a time to be patient and know that we shall rise again. Things will become good for us again. Thank you very much. I'll now open up for questions and discussions.
Yeah, Mr. Mathew, I'm Haresh Walia.
Yes, sir.
I'm Haresh Walia. I'm a developer in Mumbai.
Yes, sir.
How means we are planning a commercial building in Khar, Mumbai.
Okay.
We would like to have your consultancy from the planning point of view until the executions and the completions. How we can approach you and how we can able to go ahead.
Let me see. I think I have your email ID.
Yeah.
Let me see. I mean, we will definitely contact you.
Yeah. Okay. No problem. Thank you.
Definitely contact you. I mean, the intention of this was not to sell myself. The intention was for the industry perspective. So, I mean,
no, I got it. But since I liked your conversations and the concept of designing and the planning,
yeah,
we would like to take your services.
Appreciate it, sir. In fact,
you based
yes,
based in Mumbai or?
I'm based in Powai.
Powai. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'll expect your email by Monday or Tuesday.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Mathews.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, this is Kunal Tutalia. So I have a question in respect of redevelopment projects having, say, 7 to 15 floors. Okay. So now the problem generally what the developers face in a redevelopment project is the average size of the plot is anywhere between 700 square meters to around 1500 square meters.
Yes, sir.
So when it comes to length area, correct? So do you have any suggestion in terms of what should be the, apart from the...
In any case, I would believe that what you would need on a minimum would probably be an 8-passenger elevator. Depending upon the population, you need to establish the numbers. And in addition to that, you will need a stretcher lift which can take care of your requirements.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mathews. Karan, do you have any questions?
So Matthew, Mr. Matthew, in continuity with Mr. Kiran Chotalia's question,
yeah.
Can you give me an average passenger capacity on a total habitable area or square feet? Say suppose we have a total habitable area of somewhere around 10,000 square feet in a residential building, having a 2-bedroom or a 3-bedroom apartment, and the total capacity of the habitable area is 10,000 square feet.
Okay.
How much passenger lift is to be designed?
Okay, so I mean, I would for a small let's say a 10-floor or a 15-floor building. I mean, I would sort of say that okay, we could probably go with a little bit of a thumb rule. But typically, what you need to do is you need to get into a traffic calculation. But still, to address your point, is this a high-end building? Is it a low-end building?
It's a high-end building.
It's a high-end building. So if you look at National Building Code of 2016, vis-a-vis 2005, 2005 had talked about a 7.5% handling capacity across residential buildings. In 2016, we corrected it because we realized that depending upon the level of the building, if you're talking about a high-end building, it is not necessarily the population movement that becomes critical. What people want is they want space inside the elevator. So if it's a high-end building, you probably would need to look into a situation where though it's a 20-passenger elevator, not more than 4 or 5 people will normally travel in it, but they want that space. On the other hand, if it's a low-end building, probably you could manage with a 10-passenger or a 15-passenger elevator. But if it's a high-end building, you will need to increase the capacity of the elevator. The numbers, again, would depend upon what all is it that you're offering as facilities. And I would still say that probably traffic analysis is the best way to go about it and know what it is. Do not work with thumb rules. Ensure that your building is backed with a traffic analysis report so that you know what it is. And if it's, let's say, 4 into 4 apartments, 2-bedroom, and if it's, let's say, 15 floors, probably you're good enough with one 8 or 10-passenger elevator and one maybe 15-passenger structure elevator. You probably would be good, but you still would need to, probably have some sort of a document to say that okay, this is the reason why I picked on this particular elevator. It's a very high-end building. Probably both these elevators would need to be 20-passenger elevators, and probably you could even look in terms of a speed which is maybe at 1.5, while a low-end building for 15 floors you do 1 meter per second. For a high-end building, 15 floors you probably do 1.5 meter per second. It still has to be backed by some sort of a design. Maybe not as complex for a commercial building. Maybe not as complex as like a tall building.
Sorry, Mr. Matthew, I would like to elaborate here. See, basically in Mumbai, the FSI ratio to the plot is very high, and in that the requirement of the open space, the plinth area is very less. So in that, if you say in a high-end building, you'll require a 2 lift of 20 passenger each. There will be a very small area which is being left for the habitable area, because it requires a staircase also, a cut-off lobby also, and a lift lobby also. So, okay, no problem. I think it will be on each and every planning point of view. Yeah. But so, I think...
Yeah, so just to elaborate here, we need to recognize that as the building grows taller, your core for the elevators start increasing exponentially. So for instance, if you look at Burj Khalifa, the core for the elevators at some points are more than 65% of the whole building floor plate. So we need to remember that the building grows taller, your core starts getting smaller. Your usable core starts getting smaller.
Okay, thank you very much.
Reality.
Good afternoon, Mr. Matthew.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Anil Thakariya.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, a question, Mr. Matthew. For commercial buildings around the range of 150 to 200 meters, when things have opened up in Far East, the time to desk taken is about 1.5 hours to 2 hours with the present, social norms and the COVID guidelines and all. So, can you throw some light on that? That how would it function in the future if these sort of timelines are there for a commercial building?
Okay, just let me see if I can get to my. See if I can.
And one more point on that: would the codes also required to change our NBC codes?
Just a second. Just a second. Let me address that.
Sure.
Attack. Sorry to interrupt. I would need to leave the session. So can you remove me as a host?
I'll take that. I'll take it.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Just give me a minute.
No problem.
Yes, Priyanka, I'm the host again, so you can carry on.
Okay. Thank you very much.